Hey guys, Jay here, welcome to EonsOfBattle. In this video, I want to declutter the messy subject of mini photography and show you guys how to take easy, effortless photos of your minis. And stay tuned to the end to see what the EOB Complete community has been up to this week. Taking good photos of really little things is a unique challenge us mini painters face. Our eyes are so tuned into our work that it can be really frustrating when the camera does not capture that special something that made us whip out our cameras in the first place. So what is the secret? Well, it's not buying one of these. I've owned one of these for years and I could not tell you how to get good photos with it. What you do need can be broken down into 3 manageable parts. You need a camera, some light, and the model. You wouldn't think it, but the camera should be the easy part. Your phone. Most cell phones these days can take better pictures than the human eye can see, so it's more than good enough. If I'm not taking photos for the channel, I am always using my phone. And if you can keep a secret, a lot of phone pictures make it into the videos too. So, how do you take a photo? It's easy, just leave everything on auto and don't ever use the flash. Ever. Moving right along, lighting is way more important than the camera. Wherever you paint the mini is where it will look its best. Hopefully you're painting under decent light, a desk lamp works great. I paint under a pair of these. You painted the mini based on this light, so this is where the model will look the most right. I see people all the time finish a model and then take it to where they think the lighting is better to photograph it. I've seen photos from the kitchen, I've seen photos from the bathroom, and I've especially seen photos taken outside or in front of windows. Don't do that. It's not good. The model will look different, and it's because the light is different. The look that inspired you to take the photo in the first place is back at your painting station, so take the photo there. Lastly, to get a good photo, take it at the angle the model looks best. Hold the model right where you painted it and then place your camera where your face is. This will show off the model as you see it. For years, I got this wrong. Don't go low looking from the model's perspective, and don't go too high looking down the model's shirt. The model will look its best while you're painting it, so just put the camera between your face and the model. And if you don't want to hold it or your hands are full with the camera, you can use a little bit of poster tack or blue tack to hold it in place for you. Follow these 3 steps and you will get great photos that show off your minis perfectly. Well, I hope I've given you all the secrets to good mini photography. If you like this video, we have lots more like it on our channel, so check those out. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and as always, thanks for watching.
Not so fast, Jay. That's a good start, but there's a lot more to it. Let's let the grown-ups talk for a bit. What Jay described is perfect for documenting your work or sharing work in progress photos. But what if you want to impress? What if you want to become Insta famous? Hot, steamy glam shots are then a must. I have 3 different styles of creating great looking model photos. But before that, I want to break down the equipment so that you understand the fundamentals of how cameras work, talk a little bit more about lighting, and show off my wild new setup. As Jay mentioned previously, the camera is honestly, at this point in history, the least important part of the photo taking process. And I know it sounds silly. Most phone cameras are great, most digital cameras are great, and most DSLR cameras are great. But it's important to understand how these cameras work in order to push the quality of your photos further. At its very basic level, a camera's job is to capture light that is reflected off of objects. Cameras these days have millions of buttons and options and settings that you can change to make your photo look exactly right. But starting off, you really only need to understand 4 settings. These are universal in every camera, even your phone. The first 3 are interconnected, so I'm going to start there. They are f-stop, shutter speed, and ISO. All these settings affect how much light is hitting the photo sensor. I'll define what these settings mean, and then I'll show you how they work together. The simplest of the 3 is ISO. ISO's main job is to control exposure and how sensitive your camera's sensor is to light. A low ISO number, like ISO 100, will take a darker photo than an ISO of 3200. But there are significant drawbacks to using a high ISO. You'll notice more noise in your photos and the general quality of the photos will suffer. Many cameras have a native ISO, which is where the sensor performs the best. But for the basics, try to keep your ISO under 400. If the image is too dark, either add light or adjust the shutter speed and f-stop, which we'll get into later. The best way to understand what ISO values give you the best look is to try them out and see what looks the sharpest. But at the end of the day, all you need to know is that the ISO controls the exposure of the sensor to light. Whether mechanical or digital, the shutter lets in light and then stops it. The shutter speed is how long the shutter is open. It is shown in seconds and fractions of a second. The longer the shutter is open, the more light is let in. The downside is the longer your shutter is open, the more motion is captured. If you have shaky hands or a subject that won't stop moving, you'll see motion blur. There are many ways to combat this, like using a tripod with a remote, or changing the shutter speed to be quicker, like 1/100th of a second. But all you need to know is the shutter speed lets in light for a given amount of time. F-stop or F-number is the numeral value given to the ratio of focal length and the diameter of the aperture opening. Well, obviously, that makes complete sense. Woo, I don't know what this means. Okay. All you really need to know about it is in your camera, there is something called an aperture. It looks like this. It opens and closes, but not all the way like the shutter. It allows light to enter. The f-stop value is what the camera shows you when adjusting the aperture. An f-stop of f2 is more open and lets in more light than an f-stop of f22. If the f numbers are confusing, think of them as fractions. f2 is 1/2, and f22 is 1/22. If I had a pie and gave myself a giant 1/2 piece of it, and gave Jay 1/22 of the pie, he would not be a very happy Jay. J. Abrams. Again, you may say I'm going to crank that aperture open to let in the most light. But the downside of a wide open aperture is a shallow depth of field. Depth of field is the area your subject is in focus. Cameras can only focus on one point just like our eyes. But with adjusting the aperture, you can change how much of the image is in focus. An f-stop of f2 has a shallower depth of field than f22. On phone cameras, there isn't an adjustable aperture, so you're stuck with what is given. Now that we understand ISO, shutter speed, and f-stop, and how those controls affect exposure, we need to talk about color temperature. Not all lights are made equal. Some have a more orange hue, and some have a bluer hue. Each temperature is measured in degrees of Kelvin, but all you really need to know is the lower the number, the more orange the light is, and the higher the value, the bluer. 5,000 to 6,000 K are in the middle of the range and look more like bright white light. This matters because if you're using artificial lighting, you will need to make sure all of your bulbs have the same color temperature, or else you may get a weird blend of light on your minis that can take away from your paint job. Now that all your lights are the same, it's time to set your camera's white balance. Most phones do it automatically unless you're using a different manual photo app, and most cameras do too, but they don't always do a good job. There is a white balance button on my camera, and I can set the color temperature to the correct value. If I didn't know the color temperature, I could take a picture of this gray card and the camera will set the white balance for me. You could also use a white piece of paper. Oh, that was a lot of new terms there, guy. But they will start making sense as we start applying them later in the video. Right now, we just have a few more pieces of equipment to cover. Rapid fire time. Whether you have a DSLR or mirrorless, you'll need a lens. These focus the light onto the sensor. For most purposes, a kit lens or a lens that may come with the camera is probably good enough. There's a lot of factors and numbers and confusing physics with lenses. You'll see numbers like 35mm or a range like 18 to 35mm. This is the focal length of the lens, which affects many properties, but mostly field of view. How much of the scene is captured. The lower the number, the more of the scene is in view. You will also see a ratio like 1 to 1.8. That is called your lens speed, and also shows your lowest f-stop. There is also a diameter marking next to a number. Photographers balance all these properties to make sure they get the best quality photo they can. But if you're new to photography, still start with a kit lens, and learn a lot, and then upgrade. Is that a camera in your pocket, or are you just happy to see me? Most of us have one of these friends, and they are great. You can use the stock camera app, or even an app like Adobe Lightroom that allows for manual control similar to a big boy camera. But an app. What has 3 feet and can't walk? A tripod. This cutie pie will hold your camera in place while you take photos, but they don't necessarily have to be heavy duty. This crime against humanity is a pretty decent holder. I highly suggest getting one so you don't have shaky shots. And I have a spot where it's always set up ready to take high quality photos. Lights! Jay's suggestion of a desk lamp is a great one. Just make sure the color temperature of the bulbs is the same. Remember our friend Kelvin, and you'll be good to go. They are super easy to position to get your lighting just right. As I mentioned before, I have a place where I take photos. I built this table for a previous project and then turned it into a makeshift photo station. Not everybody has the room for a permanent setup, but it's easy to build a temporary one. If you have a table that butts up against a wall, you can simply tape a large piece of paper thin mat board, or even light fabric. Painter's tape works great for this. If you don't have a wall to tape to, or your spouse won't let you, simply build a U-shaped structure out of wood or even cardboard to clip or tape on your background. You may say just buy a light box with LEDs already built in, or buy one that you can light from the outside. But these boxes will limit you in terms of creativity and limit you to the types of photos you can take. You can't take photos with directional light, and you'll be fighting with your light bulbs until you get a higher wattage one. Also, it sucks working in a little box. Make your life easy and use desk lamps and a curved backdrop. For me, this table is my home. I found these recessed ceiling lights on Amazon and put them in these arms. I was inspired by these lights called Lume Cubes that have different attachments, but they were way out of my price range, so I built my own. I made these 3D printed brackets and top hats so I could diffuse and control the light. Also, I can color my light with these Roscoe gel books that lighting designers use to pick colors. They perfectly fit in my lights and magnet into place. You could also use these clear document folders to color your light. There aren't as many colors as the gel book, but they can get the job done. I also have a spot for the patented double desk lamps, and you'll see why in a bit. Now that we understand our equipment and have a place to work, it's time to take some photos. I'm going to show you 3 different styles of photography. You see product photography all the time. In magazines, Amazon, and of course, the Games Workshop web store. A beautiful miniature on a white, black, or gray background. This is a simple photo to take and really shows off your paint job. First, set your miniature on a white background. Then set up your lights to be equidistant. Then raise them up and tilt them to a 45-degree angle. Now you don't have to get out the protractor and check, but this 45-degree angle creates the most flattering look while keeping the important parts of your miniature well lit. But as you can see, there are shadows. These little lights, although wonderful, are very directional because the diode where the light comes out is very small. And even if you diffuse them, the surface area isn't very big. A softer, more diffused light comes from the size of the light source. That's why I have these desk lamps. Lots of surface area. But really, there's no getting rid of shadows. Every time you add a different light, you get a different shadow. This is why people like using ring lights or light boxes with LEDs built in. But by doing this, you're creating a flat image. Your model exists in real life. It should look like it. When we're outside, we are constantly being chased by our shadow. When they are sharp, they are unflattering, but removing them makes your image bland. With the desk lamps, I really don't need to add diffusion. The light source is big enough where the beams of light are spread out. But you could use some tracing paper, parchment paper, or diffusion gel and add it to the front of your light. It helps scatter the beam, which softens it. The downside to the diffusion is that it cuts down the amount of light produced, creating a darker image. You could also add a third light to the setup that is pointed at the backdrop. The extra light will help fill in the shadows cast on the ground, as well as help separate the miniature from the background, creating a crisp, infinitely white miniature photo. But in this case, I didn't really need to. Wonderful. But before we take those hot Insta pics, let's talk about camera and model placement. If you want to just show off your paint job, a nice even front shot might be perfect for you. If you want a little bit of your saucy base to be seen, take the photo a little higher with a slight downward angle. This is particularly important to remember for larger models because they thick. You want to see that trunk, that depth. You're not going for a police helicopter shot, but you want to see a little bit of that Z axis. The angle of your dangle depends on what you want to show on the model. But I found a slight downward tilt of the camera to be the most flattering. This needs to work in conjunction with the rotation of your model. How you or the sculptor pose the model will affect the most appropriate viewing angle. It's called many names. The golden angle, the sexy angle, the beauty shot. Whatever it is, every model has it, and you have to Indiana Jones your way into finding it. What I do is rotate the model in the camera view. Some models, like the Scutari, have a forward direction because of the gun that tells me the sexy angle. For the Space Marine, the sexy angle is away from his gun, and more so where he is looking in the distance. I also make sure no other parts of the model obscure the face or torso. Now that I'm happy with my setup, it's time to take the photo. First thing is to check the white balance and make sure it's set correctly for your camera. Now it's time to adjust our 3 favorite settings: ISO, shutter speed, and f-stop. Everyone has a different order in which they adjust the settings, and it all depends on the look you're going for and the environment that they're in, but this is my thought process. First, I adjust the f-stop because that also controls the depth of field. For this model, an f-stop of 11 is good because the majority of the important parts are in focus, but if I wanted, I could go wider, but the image would get darker. Then I adjust the ISO. I want the crispiest image that I can get. I found an ISO of 200 would work. Then I adjust the shutter speed. Since it's on a tripod and the remote controlled from my computer, I'm not too worried if the exposure is a little longer. Alright, now let's take the photo. Nice! From these settings, you can then make more adjustments if you would like. For miniature photography, this is generally my starting point, but your mileage may vary. When starting this journey of miniature photography, always try out new ideas and see what the results are. You never know, playing around might deliver the best results. For the phone users out there isn't much to change. Just make sure your photo is in focus. You can use an app like Lightroom to take your photos, and I've seen people get a lot better results with that. It allows you to adjust your ISO, shutter speed, white balance, and file format, while also being a good photo editor after the fact to get the most natural looking photos you can on your phone. A white background might not be for everyone, and a lot of people like an infinitely black background instead. And it might complement your models better, like these white necrons. I have this felt fabric that does a pretty good job absorbing light. I've also heard faux velvet works great. I've even had luck with just painted masonite. The trick is the lighting. The goal is to keep the light off the backdrop. I made these top hats for my light that make the beam stop spreading out and lighting the backdrop. You can do this to your lamps by using cardboard with a smaller hole in it. On these production lights, they have barn doors that help control the spill. You can do something similarly with cardboard to block the light. You also may need to move your model away from the backdrop so there's less light bouncing around. I got my setup looking good with minimal spill. It might look interesting to add a third light that is just backlighting the miniature. That will help separate it from the black background, but that is up to you. Last thing on backgrounds. There are so many different photo backgrounds you can buy, or you can even make your own. I like using this LED backlight by Bowling so that I can have any background color I want. All I have to do is shine it on a white backdrop and make sure my lights are focused on the model and aren't hitting the background. The last thing we need to know about product photography is how to take photos of groups. Group shots of armies are incredibly difficult to take because there are more models to focus on. Inevitably, at least one of your models is going to be out of focus. The first thing you need to try is adjusting your depth of field by changing your f-stop. As you can see, widening the depth of field allowed for more models to be in focus. But this might not be enough and you can't adjust the aperture on your phone. The next thing to try is moving the camera back. This may work for you because when you move the camera away from the models are perceived to be on the same plane by the camera. The downside to this is that you have to crop your photo after the fact or resize it, potentially losing a little quality. There is one more way, but it requires a lot of post-processing. Image stitching is a technique you used if you've ever taken a panoramic photo. The camera takes multiple photos and puts them together by tracking reference points. You can do the same thing with your army photos by taking many photos with different focus points, and then use a program like Photoshop to combine them together, keeping everything that is in focus. The more photos you take, the better it'll be, but it's very time consuming and you either need to use a timer or remote to take the photo, because even just a little tap of the tripod will ruin it. Also, it's not always perfect. This should get you going on taking clean photos of your models that you can be proud of. But now it's time to get a little dirty. So put on your beret, slip into your most eccentric shirt because it's time to become an artiste. Some people like to throw around the word story when it comes to talking about miniature photography. Make sure your photos tell your audience a story. Take a photo with a group of models so that it tells a story. I have no clue what that means because in general, people are just taking product photography. They are just showing off the painted minis. Just because you're zoomed in a little doesn't mean there's a story, or even using moody lighting. To me, you have to pretend you're a director and a scenic designer. We need to set a stage. There needs to be scenery, actors, lights. I told you we were going to become eccentric artists. It's the shirt. Let's go even more in depth with our lighting setup. Lighting is a very nebulous subject that's difficult to explain because there's no rules and limitless options. Good lighting almost feels like magic. In my past working in theater lighting, I've gotten overwhelmed by choices. I mean, think of the sphere of angles around your models. Or if you're using RGB LEDs, how many colors you can create. There are so many choices. This is where, as an artiste, you have to use self-discipline and limit your decisions. You wouldn't use all 100 paints you own on one single mini. Let's talk about lighting directions first. I'm going to limit you to 4 directions and 3 angles. You get to choose from front light, side light, either left or right, backlight, or top light. Your angles are 0 degrees, which can only be used for top light, 45 degrees, and 90 degrees. Obviously, there's a lot of angles in between, but start here. These lighting directions do convey a lot of information about your scene. A front light at 90 degrees deadens natural shadows, where 45 degrees keeps some of the shadows. Personally, I think straight up front light just flattens your image and makes it look 2D. That's why in the product photography section, we had our lights as a front left and front right, hanging in between the front and side directions, but start with front light and then move from there. Side light really helps give your models a 3D look. It casts shadows, creating a lot more visual interest. Backlight helps separate your figures from the background, and on its own, silhouettes your model. This might be a desired look for models hiding in the background. Top light creates a moody look. It's also a great choice if you want your models to look like they're inside a building, since most lights are directly above you. Keep those angles in mind, and that should help with your decision making. The last thing about lighting is color. With this gel book, I basically have limitless colors for my lights. But I really don't. Lighting designers talk about color story, a map that they can follow using the script of the play. We don't have a script in miniature photography, so we have to make one. Let's start by setting the stage. Jay and I have been playing Kill Team a lot recently, and I love these Lictor models. But his Space Marines, although beautifully put together and painted, are my mortal enemies. My idea is to have an old, war-torn planet currently occupied by a Tyranid Hive fleet, but a group of Space Marines are defending an ancient city that contains resources that are important to the Imperium. I used a Kill Team board and terrain Jay has made over the years to set my scene. Based on my narrative, I'm thinking the Space Marines know the Lictors are around and are scouting out the area. But little do they know, the Lictors are right behind them. This is the basic composition of the photo. We have our Space Marines in the foreground, with the Lictors in the back, waiting to pounce. Now that we have set the stage and know the narrative behind our actors, it's time to add lighting. While setting up, I added the LED to the back, just to see what that would look like, and it gave me some ideas about the color story. I want to have the Lictors in the back be ominous and in shadow, but I also added a little bit of red sidelight to give them dimension. Since they're in the back, we won't really be able to see them, but little details like this add to the overall composition. With that orange-red background, I think it'd be interesting to light the Space Marines in cool colors, but backlight them in orange so they still feel like they are part of the scene. I was liking how this was looking, but I wanted to add emphasis to the Space Marines. I added an extra light on a dimmer so that I could control how much they were highlighted. It's a lot of lighting and moving stuff around, but the end result will be worth it. With that, I was pretty happy and took some photos. Try out different angles, move around your board, and have fun seeing your models in a different light. Also, rearrange or add additional scenery to continue experimenting. Remember, you're wearing your artiste shirt. Do it proud and maybe change the colors? You never know what you're gonna get. What I'm calling stylized photography combines what we learned in the product photography section and the narrative section. The goal is to showcase the model's paint job, but also make it look like it's in an environment. Bigger multi-level terrain is perfect for this. What I found works best is set up your scene like we did in the product photography section. 2 lights equidistant with a downward 45-degree angle. Then I take one of the lights and gel it with a color, in this case royal purple. The idea is we're just draping the model in that light. The light that we didn't gel is our key light, or main source of light. This creates a really striking photo while also keeping the details from your paint job. Experimentation is key. And what's really important is to make sure your light is staying on the model and not spilling all over the place. With my little lights, I actually added a little piece of tape to block the light. I took more models and had fun playing around with the lighting, trying out different colors and angles to see what's possible. The only way to get good at this is to try out different combinations and look at the photos with a critical eye. What looks good? What do you hate? And what makes your paint job look the best? If you're looking for inspiration for these kinds of photos, look at _fizz_gig_ on Instagram. Those photos are absolutely stunning and also have beautifully painted minis. With our photos taken, what now? Should we edit them? There is a lot of controversy about photoshopping models in the community. I think it's as simple as, do you really want to? In this day and age, you see exactly what the photos look like without developing film. If you don't like the photo or the lighting, just adjust and retake. It's as easy as that. I'm personally really finicky about models, so I always shoot in a RAW format. There are many different RAW formats, so check your camera settings. But essentially, a RAW format has extra data compared to a format like JPEG that you can manipulate after the fact in an editor like Lightroom or Photoshop. When adjusting the exposure and other levels, the idea is to keep it looking as natural as possible. Have it look like your eye sees it under the lighting conditions you took the photo in. If you add too much vibrance or saturation, you can make your models look like clowns. I see people doing some select adjustments like brightening up their power weapons to make them look like they are crackling. I don't really mind stuff like that because it makes for a more interesting photo, but it definitely isn't what it looks like painted. The only other adjustments I would make is photoshopping out dust or particles if these images are going to be shown on a larger screen. Otherwise, it may just be easier to adjust your lighting and try again. And with that last little bit of advice, go out and experiment. The world of miniature photography isn't that scary, and with a little bit of light and some practice, you can also take amazing photos. We have given you everything you need to know in order to take crispy, clean miniature photos, and now you have no excuse to take bad photos.
If you're looking for some practice, it's time to join EOB Complete. We put out a challenge to our community to send us before and after photos of their recently finished models to be immortalized in our videos. If you want to join in the fun, you can submit a before and after photo of your painted mini to our Discord server, which you can find in the description below, or you can post it to Instagram with the hashtag EOBComplete. Without further ado, let's look at and get inspired by what the folks have finished this week. A Nurgle Land Raider Crusader by Yamar01, an Old School Chaos Space Marine by Alexis Yamato 98, a Dark Angels Landspeeder by The Watcher in the Dark 85, an Ultramarine Eradicator by Muggus, a Necron Warrior by Canary, some Imperial Guardsmen by Kilty O'Neill, a Stormcast Eternal by Steve the Novice, an Elf Warrior by Boba Fett IG88, a 75mm Adventurer by Just Make Stuff, a Nurgle Terminator by Mox, Fallen Warden Zaravan by Power Surge, Dark Apostle with Retinue by Ferrio von Serfio, a Space Marine Captain by Crossfire 224, a Monstrous Warrior by Obscuro, and some Shadow Elves by Evo Steel. Congratulations to everyone for a job well done. It's no small feat to get paint on minis, and you all should feel really proud. Nothing gets the hobby juices flowing like finishing a project, and we all thank you for sharing your work, motivating us and the hobby community to paint our plastic. Thanks for sharing, and as always, thanks for watching.